Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in. In this video, we'll walk through replacing the seals in the OptiFlo pump provided in the Quick Kit from Pentair. The Quick Kit for the OptiFlo comes with the mechanical shaft seal, 3 drain plug O-rings, the volute O-ring, seal plate O-ring, pump lid O-ring, and a small tube of silicone lubricant. So let's get started and remove the pump lid by turning it counterclockwise to remove it from the pump pot. If we remove the clear lid from the clamp, we can see the pump lid O-ring. We can use a small pick or flat blade screwdriver to help remove this O-ring from the lid. And now we can remove the strainer basket and then the drain plug from the pump pot. We need to separate the pump pot from the pump housing. This step can be done by one person, but would be much easier with 2 sets of hands on the pump. The pot's held on by 4 retaining tabs. These tabs need to be disengaged to move the pot. Start by pressing in the 2 top tabs and get the pot moved enough to keep them down. Then, while holding the pot firmly to prevent the top tabs from popping back into place, depress the 2 bottom tabs and pull the pot away from the volute. Once we get the pot off the housing, we can go ahead and remove the volute O-ring. While we're here, we can remove the drain plugs from the volute. The OptiFlo has 2 drain plugs on the volute to accommodate horizontal or vertical discharge configurations. The volute is attached to the seal plate by these 4 screws with retaining nuts. We'll use a number 2 Phillips screwdriver and a 3/8 wrench to hold the nuts from spinning. While removing these retaining screws, we recommend you keep them together, and also notice that the retaining nut has a flat side and a rounded side. The flat side will go against the back side of the seal plate when we reassemble the pump. With the retaining screws removed, we can separate the volute from the seal plate. We'll go ahead and give the impeller a spin to make sure it turns freely. We can go ahead and remove the seal plate O-ring as well. To remove the impeller, we need to access the back of the motor shaft by removing the cover from the back of the motor. We can use a 1/4 inch nut driver to remove the 1 screw holding the cover in place, and then the cover will slide off the back of the motor. Be careful when removing the cover, since there are wires from the motor to the switch that is attached to the cover. For viewing purposes, we'll go ahead and remove these wires so we can get the cover out of the way, but this step is not necessary. With the cover removed, we can use a pair of needle nose pliers, or we can use a flat blade screwdriver between the frame of the motor and the fitting to hold the shaft. If you have a newer pump with the TEFC motor, instead of removing the cover, you can hold the shaft with a 1/4 inch Allen key through an opening in the back of the motor cover. And then we can loosen the impeller by turning it counterclockwise. With the impeller off, we can remove the impeller portion of the mechanical seal by twisting and pulling. You can see here that the rubber seal from the assembly stayed on the impeller shaft. It's important to make sure we remove this before installing the new mechanical seal onto the impeller. To remove the seal from the seal plate, we need to separate it from the motor by loosening these 4 through bolts at the back of the motor. We'll use a 1/4 inch nut driver to loosen these 4 through bolts and remove the seal plate. The through bolts on the TEFC motors are Phillips head style fasteners and are accessible without removing the cover. It's important to take care when moving the motor around at this point, since with the through bolts removed from the seal plate, the motor ends could separate if the motor is jarred. And now with the seal plate off, we can use a 5/8 socket to drive the seal out of the seal plate. And now we can start the reassembly in the reverse manner. Before installing the new seal into the seal plate, we'll make sure the seal seat is free from dirt and debris that could prevent the seal from seating completely. When handling the new seal, it's important to try and not touch the sealing portion of the seal with your hands, since dirt and oils can cause it to not seal properly or fail prematurely. We'll use a soap and water or alcohol and water solution to lubricate the seat to make installation of the seal easier. With a clean 1/2-inch PVC coupling, we can press the seal into the seat. It'll usually seat by hand, but if we have to, we can use a rubber hammer to gently help seat it completely. If we do contaminate the seal, we can clean it with a lint-free cloth or a clean tissue. Now let's reinstall the seal plate by positioning it on the motor with the drainage opening in the down position. And then securing it with the 4 through bolts, tightening them evenly in a crisscross manner. The torque spec for these bolts is 28 inch-pounds. And now we need to install the portion of the seal that contains the spring onto the impeller. First, make sure the shaft of the impeller is clean, and then we'll use the soap and water or alcohol and water solution on the impeller shaft to help lubricate the seal for easier installation. It's important here to make sure we're putting the seal on with the sealing surface facing the seal plate. And using a twisting motion, we can install it onto the impeller shaft, taking care again not to touch the sealing surface. And again, if we touch or contaminate the sealing portion of the seal here, we can clean it with a lint-free cloth or a clean tissue. And now we can install the impeller onto the motor shaft by threading it on clockwise. And then we'll need to hold the motor shaft with our needle nose pliers or flat blade screwdriver and tighten the impeller by hand. And then we can reinstall the motor cover onto the back of the motor and tighten the retaining screw. Before we assemble the volute, we first need to install the seal plate O-ring. Make sure the seal in the groove in the seal plate is clean, and then apply a light coat of the provided silicone lubricant to the seal plate O-ring and install it onto the seal plate. First, let's make sure the sealing surface of the volute is clean. Then position it onto the seal plate with the discharge in the correct position, and in our case the discharge is in the 12 o'clock position. Now we need to install the 4 retaining screws and nuts, making sure we install the nuts with the flat side against the back of the seal plate. And then evenly tighten them by hand in a crisscross pattern. The final torque spec for these bolts is also 28 inch-pounds. Now we can install the new volute O-ring. First, we'll make sure the opening to the volute is clean. Then apply an even amount of the silicone lubricant to the new volute O-ring. And then install the O-ring onto the pot assembly. And we can also go ahead and install new O-rings onto the drain plugs, and then screw them into the volute clockwise and finger tighten. Make sure the sealing surface of the pot is clean, and we can reinstall it by depressing the retaining tabs and pressing the pot onto the volute. Press it on until all 4 retaining tabs re-engage the pot completely. If all 4 tabs do not engage completely, the pot will not seal to the volute properly. And next we can install the strainer basket, aligning the opening in the strainer basket with the opening in the front of the strainer pot. Then make sure the groove for the O-ring and the pump lid is clean, and apply an even amount of the silicone lubricant to the new pump lid O-ring. Then install the O-ring onto the pump lid. And reinstall the lid into the clamp. And then reinstall the lid assembly onto the pot by pressing down and turning it clockwise. Now install a new O-ring onto the strainer pot drain plug and screw it into the drain hole clockwise and finger tighten. The pump is now ready to go back into service.